Good morning. Welcome to the online video of rules and expectations for extracurricular activity participants for the Northern Ozaukee School District for the 2018 and 19 school year. The first item we would like to discuss today is the attendance policy. All participants are expected to be in school for the entire school day. If you are not feeling well in the morning and decide only to come into school at lunch, you will not be allowed to participate in our extracurricular activities. Some of the things that would make exceptions to this are attendances that are excused ahead of time by the high school administration, specifically by the principal. For example, some of these items might be doctor's appointments, driver's tests, college visits, field trips, etc. If you have any other kind of situation that requires you to miss part of the school day and yet you still wish to participate in extracurricular activities, you will need to get the absence approved by the high school principal prior to missing that day. When we talk about attendance, we are student athletes, and the student portion comes first. Your goal here is to get your education and prepare yourself for the next step of your life. Therefore, that is why attendance is expected and you will be in school for the entire day. The second item that we want to look at is our athletic eligibility. Starting with the third Monday of every term, the high school office sends a list of all students who are either receiving a 0, a 1, or an incomplete in their academic areas. With those lists, the athletic director then matches up to see what rosters of current athletics are going on. If a student has a 0 or an incomplete, for the first week they receive a probationary notice. What probation means is that the student is still allowed to participate in all athletics, practices, games, team events, and so forth. But during their resource period, they will be working and meeting with that teacher in the subject that they are behind in an effort to raise their grade. If after the first week they have raised their grade, and the following Monday, the student will then come off academic probation. The timeline for looking at the list for academic probation is that the high school office runs them between 7 and 7:30 every Monday morning. Teachers are expected to have their grades updated by then. If you ever have an issue with any of the grades not being updated in an appropriate time, I would urge you to have a conversation with the teacher to see what it is. Some of the options that I also follow through with the teachers are, if there's a student who has been on probation 1 week, sends me their resource verification letter and says that they are making progress, yet they are still on the list, I usually will make a phone call or an email inquiry to see if that student is still on probation or still not meeting expectations for those grades. If a student does not raise their grade or is not passing on the second week in a row or second consecutive week, they are now what we call academically ineligible for the week. When we talk about academically ineligible, what the expectation for them is now to raise their grade. That is their priority. While they may still attend practices and team events, they will not be allowed to dress for the game. They will not be allowed to play in the game. Their focus is raising their grades. When that is done, if they were to follow along and raise their grade again a second time, then they would regain their eligibility for the following week. Now, there are two types of academic ineligibility. The first one is if you get a 0 or an F in a class. If after the second week of having an F, after the second consecutive week of having F in the class, what happens then is you have 1 full week of being academically ineligible. As stated previously, you cannot play in the game. You can still go to practice, you can still travel with the team. You are not allowed to dress for the games. It is different if you receive an incomplete. An incomplete means you are missing some work either due to an absence, some other kind of reason for moving that you haven't maintained all your progress. How that is different is that once you make up the grade, you would immediately regain your eligibility. For example, at 7:30 on Monday morning, the athletic director receives a list and your name is on the list for the second consecutive week having an incomplete in a, let's say, algebra class. What happens then I talk to the teacher. The teacher says, yes, you have to make up a quiz or make up a test, and then that they may take care of it that day. If you take care of that day and you are now passing the class, the teacher notifies the athletic director, notifies the office, and instantly that student regains their eligibility. So example, at Monday morning at 7:30, you may not be eligible to play in a, say, soccer game that evening, but by noon, if you've made up the grade and the athletic director has been notified, you will then be allowed to play in that afternoon. So that's kind of the difference between getting a 0 and getting an incomplete. It's in the year that we have been doing this method of checking grades of all the athletes every Monday after the third week. We really strongly try to work with our staff to understand the difference between a 0 and an incomplete. If they're just missing work, if a student is just missing work, it's more appropriate for them to be having an incomplete than it is just to be given a straight 0. That's more reflective of what their actual progress is in the grade. Now, since the athletic director does not teach every class here at Ozaukee High School, he or she would probably not know what exactly the reason is for your student failing or is behind the grades. I would recommend and urge you to have a conversation with the teacher in that particular class. They would know exactly what your child needs to do to make up the grade. The third item we want to talk about are our forms that are needed. Because we are a WIA member school, the following items are needed. 1, a physical or an alternate year card. What the alternate year card is, what you would turn in between the physical years. So example, let's say you have a physical year freshman year. You would also need a physical year junior year. Your sophomore year and your senior year, you would turn in something called the alternate year card. The second thing you also need to turn in is your insurance waiver. This is located on either the physical or the alternate year card. As you look at that, it simply requires you to put down your doctor's information, insurance policy, etc. The third item to turn in every year is the WIA eligibility bulletin. It's a simple thing explaining WIA rules, expectations, and even our co-curricular code, which we will address in a minute. The fourth item you need to turn in every year is the concussion form. Both the parent and the athlete should be reading the concussion form and understand the process. When we talk about concussions, we are very fortunate to have Aurora Sports Medicine Institute as providing our athletic training services. This will be the 4th year that we have been contracted with them. The trainers that we have had do a very good job of taking care of our student athletes. They do an excellent job of rehabbing our student athletes and getting them back into competition. But what the most primary thing they do is that when one of our athletes does have a concussion, they do a tremendous job using the return to learn protocol that they have established as far as helping the student in the classroom as well. They communicate with teachers, symptoms, expectations of what they can and can't do depending on if they're light sensitive, if they're issuing with eye stress, looking at a video screen, and so forth. But with that communication also, they ask the teachers to keep an eye out on our students as well. And the teachers can report back if they notice any symptoms that there might be additional steps needed in the treatment of that concussion. So as you look, the fact that we have licensed medical professionals providing our training services is a benefit that we really enjoy here at Ozaukee High School. The last item we want to discuss today is our co-curricular code. When we look at the co-curricular code, we, as being a WI member school, we are required to have it. When we talk about the co-curricular code, these usually identifies topics such as alcohol, tobacco, drug use, etc. Here at Ozaukee High School, we also include behavior. For example, if you were to ever get a suspension from the school, that can be determined to be a code violation as well under the program about conduct unbecoming. When we talk about our other normal violations, they usually include alcohol use, tobacco use, drugs, or as we previously stated, behavior. When we look at the co-curricular code, our first violation is a 25% of the season. What that means is 25% of the season is rounded to the nearest whole number. For example, in football has 9 regular season games. If you take 25%, multiply it by the 9, you get 2.25. Therefore, you would miss 2 games or 2 weeks of action, both on the varsity and JV level. In basketball, they play 22 games. So when you multiply that by by 25%, it comes out to a little bit more than 5. So therefore, the suspension is 5 games. Our first offense, as stated, is 25%. The second offense is a 50%, which means you would miss half the year. If you were to get a third offense is 1 calendar year. For example, today is May 10th, 2018. If you were to be notified of your violation of your third offense, you would not be eligible for 1 calendar year. That means the first day you would be eligible to participate in extracurriculars again would be May 10th, 2019. When we talk about the co-curricular code and the violations, it is very important to remember that student athletes are not quite, they're teenagers, their bodies are developing, and they are learning through this process. As we look at these times in their lives, we want to make sure that they are making appropriate decisions. One of the other things about the co-curricular code that we have, sometimes, as they are teenagers, sometimes they do make mistakes. In your first offense, we have something called the honesty clause. If something were to happen, if you were to make a poor decision involving alcohol, drugs, behavior, so forth, tobacco, even that this includes e-cigarettes now, that you could have up to 72 hours after the incident to self-report to the high school office, specifically the high school principal. If you were to do that, they may be able to imply something called the honesty clause. The honesty clause is when it can be implied when the student voluntarily reports themselves for violations of the co-curricular code. If they do that, then their penalty may be reduced by 1/2. So instead of 25%, it may be reduced down to 12.5%. That is only applicable to the first offense. Lastly, as we talk about here, when you look at your sports that you are involved in or your extracurricular activities, your coaches or advisors are also expected to have an expectations meeting. At their expectations meeting, they are expected to share with you the attendance policies, their behavior expectations, their other aspects as well as communications expectations, and what you should expect from them. If you have any questions ever with the coach, I'd urge you to talk to the coach as well for any kind of situations that may arise. If you don't meet your satisfaction with the coaches after that, then it is appropriate to have a conversation with the athletic director and or the high school principal. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure that you fill out the form that is associated online, and have a good day.